Hello, and welcome to the LabVIEW Mastery Tip Jar. In this video blog, we're going to talk about various topics, hints, tips, and tricks pertaining to LabVIEW that can benefit people from all levels. I've entitled this first posting Confessions of a LabVIEW Expert, and I'm going to talk about the example finder. I'm referring to this as a confession because the example finder is something that a lot of experts don't like to admit that they use, don't like to admit that they go back to a lot of the prefabricated examples and draw from those in their own work. Now, the example finder is extremely useful, very powerful, provides access to a ton of information that can really help someone in their very first day programming with LabVIEW. But I just wanted to put a frame of reference from the way that I look at the example finder as someone who's been using LabVIEW for a really long time. Right now we're looking at the Getting Started screen within LabVIEW. We can access the example finder from the bottom right here, Find Examples. It's also in the Help menu. We can get at it there from pulling down the Help menu and choosing Find Examples. So let's just launch it. We'll go to Find Examples. Depending on the speed of your computer, you might instantly see the example finder. You might be waiting a few seconds for it to fire up. As a 5-cent tour, we're going to just talk very quickly through this screen. We see that we have our Browse tab, which allows us to choose whether we're browsing by task, or we can browse by directory structure. We've got a link that brings us right into the LabVIEW zone. Although, with reference to the LabVIEW zone, if we were to include ni.com examples, what that does is it will automatically go online and dig up examples relevant to either the task that we're looking at or the keywords that we're going to search for. In addition, as we're browsing for examples, we can activate the hardware search feature, which allows us to find examples which pertain to hardware which we have on our system. If you choose first to refresh the hardware list, it'll go into Max and find out what you've got on your computer, and it will provide a list of anything. In this case, I've got a simulated PCI 6221 device on this computer. If I choose that and then choose to limit results to hardware, then when I go back and browse by task, we'll see that we no longer have this long list of examples. We only have a few that are relevant to that particular piece of hardware. And you'll also see we've got a handful of examples here which show the online icon, or the ni.com icon here, which tell us that this example came from the ni.com site. The second important tab to discuss is the Search tab. This allows us to search for individual keywords. If we first turn off our limit results to hardware, if we enter in the keyword Lissajous, which is one of my favorite examples, although I don't think I pronounced it correctly, we get a list of keywords below. We can double click then to see the relevant examples. So there's two here. Let's just fire up the second one. What this example does is just plotting a quasi 3D plot onto an XY graph. And we can play with the parameters. If you have a larger screen resolution than I'm able to show here, then you can see all of these things at once. We can change the pattern and so on. Certainly it's not important at this time to go into the details about how this VI runs. I just think it's a kind of a cool example, and if you ever wanted to show off your ability to make a LabVIEW based screensaver, this is probably a great starting point. Another set of examples I really like and find myself referring to quite often are the DAC-MX examples. If we turn the limit results to hardware back on, go to hardware input and output, under the DAC-MX section, we have a whole bunch of choices here. Let's just focus on analog measurements. We can choose voltage. And see here how we have a whole suite of selection. Let's start with the Acquire and Graph Voltage internal clock example. If we choose a device, and of course we can have a DAC-MX simulated device here, and we run it, we get a sine wave. It's done. We can choose our samples per channel and our sample rate. We can take a look at the block diagram. It's nothing groundbreaking here, but there are some nice descriptions, and there's some pretty clean LabVIEW code that you can use, and you can treat that as a basis for what you want to continue with. Now, this particular example is probably the most basic of all of them. Another great example, kind of at the opposite extreme, if we close the voltage one and we jump to the synchronization section, let's pick the multi-device sync AI start trigger change detection. Now, we're not going to run this example, but if you take a look at the block diagram, you see that this is getting a fair amount more sophisticated than the previous example. But it's nicely laid out, it's very clear, nice clean lines, and a good description of the steps. So if you ever have to do synchronization or anything like that, you can actually get a lot of excellent information from the examples. The last example I wanted to discuss is one called the XY chart. So if we do a search and we enter in the keywords XY, double click the one we want, turn off limit results to hardware because this is a software related example. The XY chart is not only a pretty cool looking example, where we can play with the update rate and see what's going on here. Remember, the fundamental difference between charts and graphs is that graphs display an array of data at a time, and a chart you wire in a single data point at a time, but the chart control itself takes care of the history. Well, you don't have a native XY chart within LabVIEW. So I like to offer as a challenge, and this is something that I do quite often when I'm evaluating a potential hire or really want to test a student that's either pushing my buttons or is obviously very bright, is give them this example to look at and ask them to completely explain it. So from the front panel it looks pretty cool, but if we take a look at the block diagram, it doesn't look too bad until you really start diving in behind the scenes and see what's going on. I invite you to take a look at the XY chart buffer VI. I can tell you that when I first looked at this particular sub-VI many years ago, I learned an awful lot. It may have taken a little while to go through it and finally understand it, but now the fundamental concepts behind this particular sub-VI, and of course the XY chart example in general, can really go a long way to helping you understand a lot of the fundamentals you need to develop really advanced, really sophisticated, and really modular code. This concludes this posting of the LabVIEW Mastery Tip Jar blog. Thank you very much for watching. Please feel free to add your comments below. I'd love to hear about other people's experiences with the examples in general, and also with any particular examples you feel other people might benefit from hearing about. Bye for now.